Assalamu alaikum. This is second lecture in Pakistan Studies. The title of today's lecture is Ideology of Pakistan in the light of the statements of the Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Allama Iqbal. We will be talking about the concept of two-nation theory and the concept of Muslims as a nation in the light of the statements made by these two great leaders, that is, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Dr. Allama Iqbal. In a way, this lecture is an extension of what we discussed in the first lecture. And we will be looking at their statements in the light of what we discussed yesterday. Therefore, in order to understand their contribution, we will have to give a recap of the first lecture. Earlier, we emphasized 2 points. One, the Muslims are a separate nation with their distinct culture, civilization, heritage, interests, and concerns. And their objective is to preserve and protect this identity. This sense of nationhood developed earlier than the establishment of Pakistan. And this sense ultimately created the state. Therefore, the issue is how to protect and promote this separate identity. What should be the measures and methods to achieve that objective? How best we could protect and promote that identity? The basic issue is what was the basis of this national identity or Muslims as a distinct nation. The core of this separate identity is provided by Islam. Islam has served as the sheet anchor for this concept of separate nation. And on that basis, this cause was promoted. And we will see how far these two personalities played their role. This concept of separate nation on the basis of Islam has 3 aspects. One, the teachings and principles of Islam, which are the universal aspect of this concept of nation. Second, the Muslim rule, which gave sense of confidence and sense of identity, sense of importance to Muslims in this part of the world. And also the cultural influences that came from Central Asia, because the Muslim conqueror came from that region. So some of our habits, some of our food, some of our dress has been influenced, and same can be said about the language. The third aspect relates to the impact of local environment and conditions. That is, what kind of conditions Muslims were living in, the geographic conditions, the interaction with other people also influenced their options and habits. I give you an example. For example, if you are living in hot climate, that will influence the kind of dress you would wear. Similarly, that can also influence food you eat. And this is going to be different if you are living in cold climate, where dress will be influenced by the weather conditions, by the topography, whether you live in plains, you live in mountain area. All these things influence people's choices, people's behavior, and the habits they acquire. So these factors were the basis of the identity that the Muslims developed in this part of the world, that is, in this region. While discussing the concept of Muslim nationhood and ideology, we had mentioned that role of leadership is very important. Leadership plays a vital role in propagating an ideology. And it is in this context, the context of leadership, that the role of the Qaid-e-Azam and Allama Iqbal becomes important. Now the question is, what kind of role leaders like Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Allama Iqbal play? Leadership plays an important role in creating sense of awareness, a sense of understanding, and leadership also plays an important role in mobilizing people on the basis of ideology. You not only mobilize people on the basis of ideology, you give them sense of direction. You create a consciousness based on that ideology, and in this way, a group of people actually become a highly motivated, goal-oriented, and motivational force that facilitates the implementation of ideology. It is this kind of role that Qaid-e-Azam had played for the development of the concept of Muslim nationhood, for development of two-nation theory and ideology of Pakistan. Qaid-e-Azam was a history-making personality. He not only left his imprint on history, but he changed the direction of history by creating a new state of Pakistan. Qaid-e-Azam was a visionary who could look in future and think about the situation that the Muslims of South Asia were to face over a long period of time. He was a person who was able to give them a sense of direction. Qaid Azam was a charismatic leader. A charismatic leader is a particular kind of leadership. Charismatic leadership is shaped by two basic factors. One, the personal attributes of a leader. What are the personal qualities of a leader? His visionary disposition, his capability to mobilize people. Second, the context and the situation. And charismatic leaders come up in a situation of crisis, when traditional institutions have been dislodged, new and modern institutions have been set up, whose credibility is not established. People are not satisfied with it, and they are looking for alternatives, a better solution, better prospects. It is in this situation that you have charismatic leaders. Qaid Azam came on the political scene at a time when Muslims were facing a serious crisis of identity, crisis of how to deal with the situation under the British rule. What should be their direction for the future? And it is in this connection that he emerged as a charismatic leader. I narrate to you an incident that will explain what is charismatic leader, or to what extent Qaid Azam was a charismatic leader. جب پاکستان کی آزادی کے لیے مسلمانوں کی جدوجہد چل رہی تھی، مسلم لیگ نے ایک عوامی جلسہ کرنے کا فیصلہ کیا، اور اس عوامی جلسے کو قائد اعظم نے خطاب کرنا تھا. لہذا ہزاروں کی تعداد میں لوگ دور دراز سے اس جلسے کے لیے آئے، اور قائد اعظم نے اپنی تقریر انگریزی زبان میں کی، جبکہ اس جلسے میں 25 سے 30% لوگ ایسے تھے جو انگریزی کو اچھی طرح سمجھتے تھے. لیکن جب قائد اعظم نے تقریر کی تو بالکل سناٹا اور خاموشی تھی. لوگوں نے بڑے انہماک سے، لوگوں نے بڑی عقیدت سے ان کی تقریر کو سنا. جب جلسہ ختم ہو گیا تو ایک بزرگ آہستہ آہستہ جلسہ گاہ سے باہر جا رہے تھے تو پریس والے نے اسے روکا اور اس سے کہا کہ بزرگوار، کیا آپ کو انگریزی آتی ہے کہ آپ اس جلسے میں آئے؟ اس بزرگ نے سر اٹھا کر پریس والے کی طرف دیکھا اور کہا کہ مجھے انگریزی تو نہیں آتی، میں انگریزی تو نہیں سمجھتا، لیکن اتنا جانتا ہوں کہ یہ لیڈر یعنی قائد اعظم جو کہہ رہے ہیں وہ سچ کہہ رہے ہیں، اور وہ سارا میرے مفاد میں ہے، اس لیے میں اس جلسے میں آیا ہوں. This is what is charismatic leader. That is, he enjoys the total commitment and total loyalty of the people. People have faith. People have confidence in that leader, that he can solve the problems, and that is what was the type of leadership Quaid-e-Azam enjoyed. Quaid-e-Azam played a decisive role in articulating the concept of Muslim nationhood and also bringing people, that is Muslims, in line with that kind of thinking. Quaid-e-Azam started his political career in 1906 when he became secretary to a Muslim leader, Dada Bhai Nauroji. 3 years later, in 1909, when new Government of India Act was enforced and a legislative council was established, Quaid-e-Azam was elected to that legislative council from Bombay. From that time onwards, Quaid-e-Azam remained member of the Legislative Council or Legislative Assembly, which came later on, for most of the time. For most of the years, he was part of this assembly or legislative council. In 1913, he formally joined All India Muslim League. That was established in 1906. Now, from 1913 to 1920, he was member of both political parties, that is the Muslim League, which he joined in 1913, and the Congress Party. He was member of both parties and enjoyed respect in both political parties. In 1920, he left the Congress for good. And from 1920 onward, he devoted himself completely to the help and guidance of the Muslims of British India. During all these years, the emphasis of the Quaid-e-Azam was that Muslims being a distinct and a separate identity have their own interests which need to be protected. And these kind of ideas were reflected in his statements which he gave from time to time. And if we look at the Lucknow Pact of 1916, which was an understanding, an agreement between the Muslim League and the Congress Party, facilitated by the Quaid-e-Azam, one or two things are very important. The issue of rights of Muslims was adequately dealt with in this Lucknow Pact. For example, the question of separate electorate, the Congress accepted Muslim demand for separate electorate. They also agreed that in the central legislature, 1/3 seats would be reserved for Muslims. And there were also guarantees and provisions for the protection of minority rights. In other words, now Quaid-e-Azam was working towards constitutional arrangements, towards political arrangements for the protection of the separate identity of the Muslims. If you look at the subsequent developments, like the Nehru Report, which came in 1928, this report denied Muslims all those rights that were given to them in the Lucknow Pact of 1916. Quaid-e-Azam objected to that. For example, the principle of separate electorate was discarded in the Nehru Report. Quaid-e-Azam objected to that and wanted Nehru Report to be amended. But that did not happen because Congress was not willing to amend the Nehru Report of 1928. 1 year later, Quaid-e-Azam presented what is known as his 14 points, a speech which he made in March 1929. That speech, generally described as Jinnah's 14 points, is a charter of Muslim rights and Muslim interests that represents the political, administrative, religious interests and demands of the Muslims. In a way, if you want to understand what kind of political demands the Muslim League was making as an expression of Muslim nationhood, as an expression of distinct Muslim identity, then you have to look at the 14 points of the Quaid-e-Azam. We will be discussing that in greater detail in some of our later lectures. From 1935 onwards, Quaid-e-Azam engaged in very active mobilization of Muslim community, and he began to emphasize Islam and Muslim identity more often, because he thought that a common denominator, set of values, principles broadly shared by the Muslims in this region could be an important political symbol to unify them and important instrument of political mobilization. Therefore, he emphasized that Islam is important and core to the identity that Muslims were advocating and propagating. And from 1935 onward, he began to talk about the separate interest and separate identities of the Muslims. You find that in his speeches and statements. For example, he issued several statements from time to time in 1935, in 1936, where he emphasizes time and again that Muslims are not a minority. They cannot be treated as a minority, but a separate entity and a separate community which fulfills all the conditions of being a separate and distinct nation. So there is a repetition of this theme in his speeches and statements. In 1937, there were elections, provincial elections in India, and the Congress party won elections in 6 provinces, and Muslim League's performance was very poor. In this context, Nehru issued a statement that there are 2 parties in India. One, the British. Second, the Congress. Quaid-e-Azam questioned this statement. He said that Muslims are a third party in India. Muslims could not be subsumed under Congress, and Muslims are a third party and a separate identity. In 1939, he said that Muslims and Hindus are 2 nations, and we are going to live as nation and play our part as a separate nation. That is, play a part in constitutional development of India. And his well-known statement, which in my view is the most comprehensive statement of why and how Muslims of this subcontinent are a nation. He said, we are a nation with our distinctive culture and civilization, language and literature, names and nomenclature, sense of values and priorities. We are a separate nation because we have our own distinct outlook of life and on life. By all canons of international law, we are a nation. Then if you look at his speech, which he made at the Lahore session of the meeting of the Muslim League, where resolution for separate state was passed, that speech basically is again a restatement of what is a separate nation. In addition to that, Quaid-e-Azam wrote an article which was published in a British magazine called Time and Tide, and the date was March 9, 1940. This article is the only article which Quaid-e-Azam wrote himself. And again, this article addresses 2 major issues. One, how and why Muslims are different and a nation. Second, what should be the political future of India? What should be the shape of the region, and how best the Muslim interests could be protected? And here the Quaid-e-Azam was talking of a separate state for the Muslims because sufficient guarantees could not be available. So in other words, we could argue that Quaid-e-Azam was playing very important role in shaping the concept of Muslim nationhood for Muslims of this region, and he had a very clear view of Islam for the Muslims of this region, and that means also for Pakistan after it came into existence. For him, Islam was a dynamic force that could unite the Muslims. It could also help the Muslims to overcome their crisis. Islam was a source of inspiration and guidance. Islam, in Quaid-e-Azam's view, provided an ethical foundation to society and to the political process. It was a kind of a broad framework, parameters within which human action is to be conducted. In Quaid-e-Azam's views, Islam is a social order and civilization. It provides guidance and inspirations for constitution making and governance. However, when Quaid-e-Azam was talking about Islam, he was also talking about the modern notions of state, governance, civil and political rights. All the ingredients of modern polity or political arrangements. For Pakistan, he talked about Islam as well as democracy, civil and political rights, socio-economic justice, and an emphasis that constitution is to be made by an assembly or by representatives. And in this connection, he also talked about the rights of the minorities. The minorities will enjoy religious rights and freedom. And in his view, Pakistan was to be a modern, democratic state that derived its ethical foundation from Islam, where the source of guidance and inspiration for constitution making and governance is going to be Islam. That is how Quaid-e-Azam, during all these years when he was leading the independence movement, and then he became Governor General of Pakistan, projected the two-nation theory, the concept of Muslim nationhood, and Pakistan ideology. Now, we'll talk about another important leader who played crucial role in developing Muslim consciousness amongst the Muslims of South Asia. I am talking about Allama Iqbal, poet and philosopher. People like him are born, but in centuries. Throughout his career, he was very conscious of the significant role Islam plays in the lives of the Muslims. Iqbal read his poem in public for the first time in 1899 in a public meeting organized by Anjuman-e-Hamayat-e-Islam in Lahore. That was the beginning of his public career as a poet. In the initial stages, Iqbal was critical of the conditions prevailing. However, he was a nationalist in his orientations. He was talking about whole of India. He was talking about all kind of people. And that you can see in his well-known poem, Tarana-e-Hind, where he talks about India as a whole. The change in his thinking came later on through reflection, through a deep study of Islamic history and also world history. He went to England for higher education in 1905. And for the next 3 years, he was in England, he was in Europe, and especially in Germany. At Cambridge, he did honors, ultimately got bar degree, bar at law, and he got his PhD from Munich University in Germany, where his name was recommended by his teacher at Cambridge University, England. He recommended that Munich University should give him PhD degree, and ultimately he got PhD degree. Let me give you some interesting facts about his stay in Germany, which are relevant today. He spent a couple of months in the German city of Heidelberg, where he lived. Now, the government of Pakistan has identified the house where he lived. तो हुकूमत पाकिस्तान ने یہ کیا کہ اس گھر کے باہر ایک کتبہ لگوایا حکومت جرمنی کی اجازت سے، جس پہ لکھا ہوا ہے کہ 1907 میں پاکستان کے نیشنل پوئٹ علامہ محمد اقبال اس گھر میں رہتے تھے. تو وہ کتبہ آج بھی آپ کو ہائیڈلبرگ میں مل جاتا ہے. اس کے علاوہ ہائیڈلبرگ میں ایک سڑک کے ایک حصے کا نام علامہ اقبال سے موسوم کیا گیا ہے. اس کا نام ہے اقبال اوفر، کیونکہ اقبال نے وہاں ٹائم اسپینڈ کیا تھا. اور تیسری بات جو آپ کی دلچسپی کے لیے ہے، معلومات کے لیے ہے، کہ علامہ اقبال کی ایک نظم ہے دریائے نکر کے کنارے. نکر وہ دریا ہے جو ہائیڈلبرگ شہر کے اندر سے گزرتا ہے. تو اس کا جرمن ترجمہ کیا گیا، اور جرمن ترجمہ جرمنی کی ایک مشہور اقبال اسکالر انا میری شمل نے کیا ہے، اور اس ترجمے کو پتھر پہ کندہ کر کے دریائے نکر کے کنارے پہ لگایا گیا ہے. آج بھی اگر آپ ہائیڈلبرگ جائیں تو آپ وہاں اقبال کی نظم جرمن زبان میں لکھی ہوئی، پتھر پہ لکھی ہوئی پائیں گے. اور جن کیفیات کا اقبال نے اپنی نظم میں، جو کہ اس نے 1907 میں لکھی تھی، ذکر کیا ہے، آج بھی آپ کو دریائے نکر کے کنارے مل جاتی ہیں. On his return from Europe to India, Iqbal focused attention on the causes of decline and degeneration of the Muslims, and how could they regain glory, how could they overcome the problems which they are facing. And he was focusing on Muslims in general and Muslims of this region, this subcontinent in particular. He was convinced that Islam can salvage the Muslims, and he was also convinced that Islam has always saved the Muslim community, and they have to turn towards Islam to deal with the current situation. For Iqbal, Islam was a living and dynamic ideology that could meet the challenges of the present day, and only through Islam and through following the principles of Islam, he thought that they could deal with the situation. He also talked about the reinterpretation of Islam to deal with the modern conditions. In fact, his discussion of Islam and the kind of role it could play in the lives of the Muslims is to be found in his lectures, 6 lectures, which he delivered in 1929 and 30, which were published as Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, which is a difficult study. That's why many people don't pay attention to it, but that's very important to understand his views on Islam. Iqbal also played important role in practical politics for the Muslims of South Asia. He was a participant in the Round Table Conference of 1931 and 32, and Iqbal was also involved in politics in Punjab. In fact, he was elected to the Legislative Council of Punjab once, but most of his time was devoted to the Muslim League in this province. and some of his views are also expressed in the letters which he wrote to Quaid-e-Azam in 1936 and 37. But I think one has to look at his address, presidential address, which he gave to the Muslim League in December 1930. This presidential address envisions the establishment of a state for Muslims in South Asia. This was a dream which Iqbal saw in December 1930. He argues in that detailed lecture that if Punjab, NWFP, Balochistan, and Sindh are amalgamated in a political entity within British Empire or outside of British Empire, that will be the destiny of Muslims of northwestern India. He thought that if this kind of solution is found, then this would provide security and balance for India, and for Muslims it would provide them an opportunity to flourish and develop themselves, and also enable them to focus on Islam. Later, if you look at his letters which he wrote to the Quaid-e-Azam in 1936 and 37, he articulates these views more clearly, and he also includes Bengal in his discussion. This is how he articulated his views. Students, today we have discussed the concept of Muslim nationhood, two-nation theory, and ideology of Pakistan with reference to two prominent personalities who played a crucial role in shaping those ideas and implementing them. Iqbal was a visionary. Iqbal was an intellectual who saw the dream that one day state will be created, but he didn't live to see that state coming into existence. He died in 1938. Quaid-e-Azam was a statesman, a strategist, an advocate of the case for Muslims, and he led the establishment of Pakistan on August 14th, 1947. Thank you, and Khuda Hafiz until we meet again.